Okay, thank you, Stephen. This might have been a better meeting if you'd have left that thing alone. I kept trying to hit to unmute and it never would work. But I want to thank you for the well, I guess I need to thank Gary for bringing my name up and filling in for you. I hope no one's too disappointed tonight. If you know Gary Kincaid, he's and not because he's my sponsor, but he's one of the best speakers I've ever been around. I've heard him probably 75 times. And what I like about Gary, he never gives the same talk. It's not a canned talk where it's, some of my favorite speakers, I can give their talk for them because I know it word for word. But Gary's is always different, and he's he's a great AA member, sober 4 years less than me, but I didn't want his time. I wanted what he had. And so anyway, I'm Ricky Russell. I'm an alcoholic. And I've been sober since August 20th of 1990. And I'm in a small town in East Texas called Jacksonville. You may not have ever heard of Jacksonville, Texas, because it never grows. The population stays the same all the time. Generally, what we'll have some young girl that gets pregnant and some young guy moves out of town. So the population just stays right there, but I've been here for a long time, and this is where my home group is. We meet at the Jacksonville Fellowship Recovery Group, and I love the people there. There's so many guys I am so close to. And Stephen and I were talking today, I started a Zoom meeting back in March of 2020, and there's people on the Zoom meeting that I've become just as close with as I am to the people in my home group, and this, I know you people have heard the saying, keep your circle small. My circle was so small when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was all the way down to a dot. And that was me. And what has happened as a result of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, good sponsorship, and getting out there and being a doer and a guy that loves AA, my circle is huge and ever expanding, So, but I took my first drink when I was 14 years old down in Grand Isle, Louisiana. You can probably tell I've got this East Texas accent. We moved to Grand Isle when I was 14 or 13, probably. And probably like most of you on here, when I grew up, I never felt like I measured up. I wasn't good enough. I always felt out of place. I didn't fit in. I just had all that internal stuff going on. I moved to Grand Isle, Louisiana, and I'm down there with a bunch of Cajuns, and I can't hardly understand them talk. Well, they start calling me Texian. Well, that made me feel even more separated. And the first thing I try to do, I smoke some of that non-habit forming marijuana. And, and I've got friends that loved it. I got some that they still love it today. I'm 64 years old. Some of those old guys, they're still smoking it. But when I smoked marijuana, what it did for me, it intensified those feelings I already have about not being good enough, not fitting in. It didn't do for me what it did for them. And my dad was a horrible alcoholic, and I did not want to be like him. My dad had, we know he had at least 25 DWIs. That was when it was possible. It's impossible to get that many in Texas now. They'll lock you up from now on. But he went to prison 3 times. And the last time he got out, my grandfather went to pick him up at the bus station, and he was drunk when he got off the bus. So I didn't want to be like Dad. But I'm in this foreign country in South Louisiana, and I was running with a guy a couple of years older than me. And one day he said, "Hey, why don't we get something to drink?" And I was curious, if I drink that stuff, will it make me act like my dad? And so he got us the man, it ought to be the national first drink of any alcoholic. I know there's a bunch of y'all on here. It was your first drink. It was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine. And he got us each a bottle. He probably outweighed me by 40 pounds. And he didn't drink all that much of his. I drank the whole bottle. So I believe, if you're new in here in our big book, the book Alcoholics Anonymous, we've got a chapter in there called The Doctor's Opinion. And if you've got a fourth edition, you go to Roman numeral 28. And this doctor says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class, talking about the chronic alcoholic, and it never occurs in the average temperate drinker. And what he's talking about there, this allergy, an allergy is nothing more than a abnormal reaction to any substance that's harmless to most people. And the manifestation of the allergy is when the alcoholic pours the booze in, it triggers this craving for more alcohol. I thought I drank for a long time because I liked the taste of it, but that wasn't the case. I had this physical allergy, from the get-go. But I drank the whole bottle, but I'll tell you something else. I was amazed before I was halfway through with it. I comprehended the word serenity, and I knew peace. Fear of people evaporated. That feeling of uselessness disappeared. And I suddenly realized that alcohol was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I became a coon ass right then. I fit right in with those Cajuns. I felt a part of them. And alcohol always made me feel like that. And some of those things you might recognize as the 9-step promises. That's exactly what I got out of drinking alcohol early on, the first time I drank it, when I got my blood alcohol just right. Now, our book talks about, on page 20, it talks about a moderate drinker. They can take it or leave it alone. And it talks about a certain type of hard drinker, that they look like us, they drink like us. It may impair their health, but for a sufficient reason, the warning of a doctor, falling in love, etc., they can stop or moderate. And then it talks about the real alcoholic. And it says he may or may not be a continuous hard drinker. But at some point in his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. In my immediate family, we have all three examples. My wife is a moderate drinker. She can take it or leave it alone. She's got, I know she's got vodka in there. There's wine in there. She drinks, usually she had one a while ago. I saw her make her a drink, vodka and pink lemonade Crystal Light. That's her drink. But anyway, she'll have a drink or two and she's done. Or if she decides, if it's like New Year's Eve or some party, she may decide, I'm going to drink more tonight. But my wife always gets enough to drink. She has never, ever, 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 ever craved alcohol after she's once poured it in. And if you're new in here and you read the big book, anywhere it's talking about craving, at least up to page 164, the craving happens only after I pour the booze in. Before that, it's an obsession. My mind thinks about it until I take the first drink. So my wife can take it or leave it alone, but here's the kind of drinker she is. She bought her bottle of vodka and it had attached to it one of those mini bottles like you get on the airplane. And it was like some flavored vodka. It was a promotional deal. And I happened to be in the kitchen and I walked by She had opened that mini bottle up and she left about a half inch in it. I'm thinking, who would do such a thing? Even a normal drinker. Why would they leave that much in a bottle? I kind of became obsessed with it. So I got some measuring spoons out and I measured how much she saved. She saved 2 tablespoons. Makes absolutely no sense to me. There's four long neck bottles in our spare refrigerator. 2 are pink and 2 are kind of lime green. And they were in the door. And every time you opened the door, they rattled around, and they were in there like 2 years. And I asked her one day, I said, are you ever going to drink those drinks there? And she said, no, I really don't like the taste of them. And I'm thinking, well, what does that matter? You know, I've drank a lot of stuff that I didn't care about the taste of it. If it had alcohol in it, that's why I drank it. So anyway, she eventually moved them to a different spot where they're not in the door, but that's my wife. My wife is a normal, moderate drinker, as the book calls it. Okay, I've got a 31-year-old son. If he makes it until AA's birthday, which is June the 10th, he'll be sober 10 years. Now, he drank just like me. I've seen him drink, and when he starts drinking, he can't pour it down fast enough. I've never seen anyone crave alcohol after they once started drinking any harder than me, my son, or my dad. And my dad died at 51 years old. It killed him. But my son started having trouble. He was like going right in my footprints. You know, he started going to jail. He went to jail about 4 times. He got a DWI. And we're in Dallas one night at my oldest son's bachelor party. And my youngest son, his name's Logan. He went to jail that night. And the next day we're on our way home. It's about a 2-hour drive. And he said, God, Dad, I am so embarrassed and so humiliated. And I said, I understand, Logan. And I said, for me, though, something would happen where I'd be embarrassed and humiliated. And it seemed like after about 2 weeks went by, that humiliation and embarrassment would start to wear off. And I'd begin to think, how can I drink and not let this stuff happen like just happened? He said, when I get home, he said, I'm going to call Zane. Well, Zane is the guy I've been sponsoring for 28 years. And so he called Zane. Zane got with him. He made 2 AA meetings and he's never been back. But his life has just continued to get better and better and better and better. And I thought, man, what's the deal? How's he staying sober without a spiritual program of recovery? It baffled me, because my wife and I both were 100% convinced he was alcoholic. And we also agreed that there was absolutely nothing we could do about it other than make it worse. So we left his alcoholism to him. We never asked him how much he was drinking or when's the last time you drank or none of that stuff. So I've asked Logan some questions. You know, step 1 says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Me being powerless over alcohol, what that means, it doesn't mean I can't drink. It means I'm going to drink if I don't take the solution that's offered. And being powerless over alcohol means I have that physical craving if I drink. And it also means that I have this mental obsession, and it doesn't matter if I'm threatened with prison, divorce, loss of job, or any of those things. The time and place will come because of this thing up here. I'll take a drink again, and it sets that craving off again. It always, I did the, the doctor's opinion talks about that. I would parrot things I heard in AA, and I'm sure you've heard people say this. I just drank to get drunk. I always drank to get drunk. One day I looked at that and I thought, now who would want to do that? You're not going to be able to pick up a woman if you're drunk. They don't want some slobbering drunk. I found out reading the doctor's opinion, I drank exactly like Dr. Silkworth says we drink. We're restless, irritable, and discontented unless we can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by a few drinks which I see others taking with impunity. And he says, after I succumb to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, I pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to do it again. And here I am. He says, this is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. So my main problem is not that I crave alcohol. It's my mind telling me when I'm stone cold sober that it's okay to drink, that this time it'll be different. This time I won't get in trouble. So then it says that our lives had become unmanageable. And I've tossed that around for years, and I realized it has nothing to do with going to jail, getting divorces, how much money I have or don't have in the bank. It's right in the middle of page 52. We call them the bedevilments or untreated alcoholism. It says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional nature. We were a prey to misery and depression. If you're new, does that make sense? And this is not talking about when we're drinking. It's when we're not drinking. And we were having a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. And I had all that stuff. So I talked to my son. See, that happens to me when I stop drinking. When I get out of jail, I have all those things going on. And the only thing that'll fix that on the planet is a few drinks. Now, I talked to my son when he stopped drinking. It didn't feel too good there for a few days, but he never had that feeling of misery or his emotions going wild. He wasn't full of resentment and fear and all that sort of stuff. So we talked about it a little further. I asked him, I said, Logan, when you grew up, did you feel as if you didn't fit in or that you weren't good enough? He said, no, I never felt like that, Dad. So he doesn't have the spiritual malady. So what he is what our big book calls a certain type of hard drinker. Even though he looks like me, he drinks like me. For a sufficient reason, he stopped drinking. And it's been 9.5 years. So now what he could be, he could have come to AA and everyone could have convinced him to stay in AA and his life continued to get better, just like it is now without AA. And he could be sitting in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and a newcomer come in dying of alcoholism, and he could tell them, you don't have to work those steps. I didn't do those steps. Look at my life. I've got a successful business. I've got a great family. But he's not like me. He doesn't have alcoholism in the way the book talks about it. But I do. And I did that over and over and over. And I'm the type guy that I'm going to go to a bar one night. I'm your prototypical alcoholics. A lot of people say, well, I didn't have a car wreck. Well, I've had enough for me and several more. I didn't go to jail. I've been to jail a bunch. And my worst experience on that, by the way, was in Tennessee. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I'm the type guy. I got a ride over to a bar. It was 30 miles or so away from here. And when the bar was over with, I guess I'm chasing women, trying to catch me a woman or something. I look around, everyone's gone from Jacksonville. And so there's no ride. And I get some of the craziest ideas sober, even today. But when I was drunk, there were some really wild ideas that just kind of came out of nowhere. It's one of those deals that, it seemed like a good idea at the time. But I go over there, and here's my intentions. I want to go over there and have a few drinks, listen to some good music, and pick me up one of these good-looking gals and hope she has a car because mine's wrecked. So I'm out there. Everyone's gone, and I get this idea. well, I think I'll just hitchhike to my parents' house. And they live about 60 miles north of here. So I get out there on the highway and I stick my thumb out and I get a ride. I don't know how far the guy took me, but he got so far. He said, this is as far as I'm going. So I got out and I'm standing there and it's like 3 o'clock, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I got tired. And the thought that came to me, I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just lay down here on the shoulder of the highway. And when I hear a vehicle coming, I'll jump up and stick my thumb out. Well, I woke up and there's several people standing over me, asking me if I'm crazy, what's wrong with you? I never heard a car. I'm sure they probably thought there was a dead man on the side of the road. But that, that's just typical stuff I did, going out to have a few drinks and I would end up in some deal like that. I'm in Tennessee. I had landed a job that was going to pay me like 4 times more than I've ever made. I had dreamed of having this job. It was a salesman for a company down here. And I'm in Memphis, Tennessee in August of 1987. And back then, newcomers, we had phone books. We had to open the phone book to find a bar. You couldn't get on your phone. We didn't have cell phones. So I found a bar and I went to the bar and I don't remember leaving there. And I came out of a blackout at one of the worst times you can come out of a blackout. That's when you're standing there talking to cops. And you can't say, is there a problem, officer? Did I do something wrong? You got to kind of figure it out, and I figured it out pretty quick. I noticed that all the traffic was going that way and I was pulled over the other direction. They had pulled me. I was going the wrong way on a one-way. And they were waiting for a breath machine to get there to give me a test. And I told the cops, I said, hey, I need to pee. I'll just step over here on the other side of the Suburban. I was in my boss's Suburban. I'll step over here and pee. And they said, oh, no, you won't. So they handcuffed me and they put me in the back seat of the cop car. And the breath machine got there. When they opened the door, the floorboard was full of pee. I told them I had to pee. And so they got a resentment. And one of them hit me in the throat with a clipboard. And I said, I'll have your job. And, I see the Shelby County Jail there in Memphis, Tennessee. I see it on that show, The First 48. And I went in that deal and I was in there for 8 days. And my cellmate, I had run out of cigarettes. My cellmate was giving me cigarettes. And the 8th morning I was in there, I was in the chow line, and a guy that had been in the big holding tank with me, he said, let me give you some advice about this jail. I said, you bet. Any advice you can give me would be appreciated. He said, whatever you do, he said, don't take any cigarettes from anyone. And I said, why not? He said, because they'll want sexual favors from you in return. And man, I went back to my cell. I started reading the Bible, and I started praying like nobody's ever prayed ever. And I don't know if it was my prayers or my mother's prayers. Well, I know what it was. It was my mother's money got me out of there that day. And so I get in, I make my first trip to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I knew AA didn't work because my dad went to AA. I found out a little history about AA, how it was back then. Some people didn't know what a big book was for a long time in this group. They had podium meetings where one guy would get up and talk about drinking alcohol and consequences, and he sat down. The next guy got up and talked about drinking alcohol and the consequences, and he sat down. And I see now why my dad didn't recover from alcoholism. He didn't have the same chance that I had. And so I went to the AA group here, though, and I made 2 AA meetings. And I'm a pretty quick study. I saw the 12 steps, and there were 2 of those steps I was out on. Step 5, I recognize that as confession. See, I'm a Baptist. My grandmother told me we don't do that confession. That's for Catholics. They do that. And so I wasn't about to do that. And I knew that 9th step meant I would have to go see my ex-wife and maybe admit the small part of that marriage falling apart could have possibly have been my fault. And so I left. And I also knew by reading those steps that the answer is God. I mean, there's no question about it. So in my mind, if I need God, why would I want to sit around a bunch of brain damaged alcoholics and them get me screwed up about God? If I need God, I know where he's at. He's down there at that church. And I'm just like Dr. Bob, in the forward to the second edition, he says, it says in there about him, he had repeatedly tried spiritual means, I'm paraphrasing, to get over his alcoholism or whatever, but it failed. I had done that too. But this time I'm really, 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 really going to try. We are some of the worst people about doing something that didn't work. Only go back and do the same thing, only try harder at it. So I went to the church and I'm sitting in there, and this has happened more than once. That Baptist preacher, you get up there and preach a really good spirit-filled sermon, and I'm sitting there and I'm feeling this conviction, and then when it's over with, the organ starts playing and they start singing that hymn, Just As I Am. And the preacher's up there, he's not going home till somebody's saved, so he's up there saying, the Lord's telling me there's one more, and God, I know it's me he's talking about. And I feel that conviction and I get all stirred up. So finally I get up and I walk down the aisle and I go down there and I turn my life over to God. And I might cry a little bit, preacher say a little prayer, and I'd leave the church and feel absolutely fantastic for a few days. And it never lasted, and I couldn't figure out why. I know now why after I got in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I come back in 1990. My second wife had all the fun she wanted. She had left. And I woke up gasping for air one morning. My heart was racing. And my dad had died 2 years prior to this. And my mother had divorced him and married another alcoholic. And 2 months prior to this, she went to wake him up and he wouldn't wake up. He had an esophageal hemorrhage and bled to death during the night. So when I woke up gasping for air, I had that moment of clarity. I knew if I took another drink, I was going to the cemetery. I know it deeper today than I did then. And I'm one of these guys that I'm not worried about going to jail or my wife leaves me or none of that. If I take a drink, I'm going to the cemetery. It's not a spiritual death like I've heard in AA. It's graveyard dead for me if I take a drink. And so I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope what happened to me don't happen to anybody in here. I sat in my pickup outside the meeting. I wasn't going in till about 5 minutes till. And I see all these people going in, and I told myself, okay, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do. I don't care how crazy it sounds, how drastic it is. I'll do anything, because that spiritual malady I was talking about, that unmanageability, alcohol treated that for a long time. And it was like someone flipped a switch in me where I could drink and it didn't treat that anymore. I could drink and that fear I had just became a deeper fear and had all these resentments and just a balled up mess. So I go in there and I just want someone to tell me what to do. And they said, get a sponsor. So I asked this guy to sponsor me, and he gave me his phone number. He said, call me if you have a problem. And he said, ask God to keep you sober, thank him at night, and read the big book. And I did that until I reached the point I was wanting to commit suicide. I'm sitting in an AA meeting, seriously thinking about doing away with myself. Now, all that stuff may be good for some people, but that didn't help me. That would have helped my son. That's probably all he would have needed. So I'm sitting in this meeting thinking about suicide, and the guy's voice got my attention. And we had read about Fred in the big book. I didn't know what we'd read or what anyone shared. My head was racing. But what this guy brought up, he said the thing that jumped out at him was on the bottom of page 42, where Fred said, quite as importantly was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. And I latched onto that deal. I didn't know what the spiritual principles were. And I know you can get on the internet and find some little cute deals like the spiritual step 1 is acceptance and 2 is hope. That's not for me. And how it works, it lists the 12 steps. And right after that, it says the principles we have set down are guides to progress. So for me, the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's all I need to know about any principles in AA. So I found out you could change sponsors. And I got a new sponsor. And this guy carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to me. He didn't carry so much his experience, strength, and hope. You know, on page 89 in our big book, it says, carry this message, ! And he did not want me to have his experience. He wanted me to have my own experience by doing what the big book said. And I'm telling you guys, my world turned around. I had a marriage that was much worse sober than it was when I was drinking. My wife and I both had this, it's kind of a video in my head. Okay, I quit drinking, we get back together, and I have this video of she and I holding hands, skipping through the yellow wildflowers, you know, just, oh, not a care in the world. That ain't what happened. It continued to go downhill. And, you know, one thing that might have contributed to it, I don't know. I'm a newcomer and I'm on that emotional roller coaster. I'm depressed one day and happy, joyous, and free the next. And somehow or another, she got pregnant after we got back together, and her emotions were doing this just like mine were. And we clashed. I mean, a lot. I mean, it was bad. Now, I wondered, you know, how did she get pregnant? Because we didn't even like each other. Well, I was sober about 25 years and I figured it out. And I didn't even need my sponsor's help to figure this out. How she got pregnant was we both liked sex enough that we'd do it with someone we didn't like. So that's how she got pregnant. So, and Logan, the one I told you about, he came from that pregnancy. We call him my sobriety baby. But this sponsor had me start taking actions in my home that changed my marriage. He said, what have you done about your marriage? And I said, well, some people in AA told me to turn it over to God. And he kind of bugged his eyes out and he said, God didn't want it, did he? And I said, I guess not. It's gotten worse since I've turned it over to him. He said, this is not a program of turning your problems over to God. This is a program of finding out what God wants you to do. And then you take those actions, and what we turn over is the outcome to God. He said, if you want to turn something over to God, he said, when you leave my house, he said, go out there and write $25,000 worth of hot checks, and then turn those hot checks over to God and see what happens. He said, your butt will be in jail because God will turn them over to the sheriff. Then he said, what kind of marriage do you want? I said, well, I want a 50-50 marriage. He said, you're screwed. I said, how? He said, if you want a 50-50 marriage, that means you're expecting 50%. He said, what we do is give and expect absolutely nothing in return. You go home and be a giver and expect nothing. He said, what do you do to contribute in your home? I said, I bring a paycheck home. He said, no, everybody does that. He said, how do you contribute in your home? And I didn't really understand what he was saying. I said, I really don't know what you mean. He said, okay, when you come in from work, what do you do? Well, I watch ESPN and the Discovery Channel. My wife's in there mopping, sweeping, cooking supper, washing dishes, washing clothes, bathing kids. And I'm a little ticked off because I'm not getting praised because I'm not drinking today. And this sponsor didn't share much. He was sort of like Clancy in a way. He said, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go home and you do the dishes. And you expect absolutely nothing in return. And I said, I got a problem with that. And he said, what? And I said, she don't work. He said, I don't give a damn if she works or not. You're doing it to get out of yourself. You go do this, expect nothing in return. And he said, this will prove the biggest lie you hear in AA, which is I can't change anybody but myself. He said, I can change anyone by the way I treat them. He said, for instance, if I slap you in the teeth, you'll come up a changed man. Or if I put my arm around you and tell you what a difference you've made in my life since you've been a part of it, that's going to change you too. He said, you do these things, it'll change your wife and God will change you. He said, if I could change myself, I would have never come to AA. I would have changed myself. So I went home and started washing dishes, and I really had to concentrate and, don't expect her to come by and say, thank God I married a man that's washing the dishes. And I began to do some stuff in the house. I started washing clothes. She did tell me not to wash hers anymore. I don't think they could fit her after I got through washing them. Started bathing my kids. I wouldn't take $1 million for that experience, and just the little things, doing, expecting nothing in return. And my God, guys, my marriage did a 180 in less than a week. I could not believe it. We're married 37 years old. And occasionally my wife doesn't act right, according to me. Anytime I think she's not acting right, all I got to do is put more effort in trying to help her have a better day and expect nothing in return. And once again, she measures right up. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen happen in my life, unbelievable. But anyway, I'm running out of time here. I'd love to go through all the steps, but I may do this on Zoom one day. Sponsorship, I believe, is the weakest thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's something that's not talked about a lot. I mean, how many of you have ever gone to any kind of sponsorship workshop and they say, okay, day one with the new guy, here's what you do. I've never been to anything like that. Any sponsorship stuff I've ever heard, they say, well, when I asked my sponsor to sponsor me, he did this or he did that. And I keep looking at this stuff. And anyway, we've revolutionized how we sponsor here. We've gone back into history in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I don't have time to explain it all, but I'll tell you this. If you're brand new and I sit down with you, we're going to spend about 2 hours. And when you leave, you're going home to do a 4th step. Something I discovered 30 years sober. I read the big book every day. It doesn't matter. I read 2 pages every day, sometimes more. It's amazing, as much as I've read it, the things I still find. I used to spend a lot of time with new guys in the chapter We Agnostics. Most of them, I don't spend any time in that chapter anymore because I found what the purpose, all you got to do is read it. The purpose of We Agnostics is nothing but trying to convince the atheist or agnostic to believe or be willing to believe in God, period. That's what the chapter's for. So now I ask this newcomer, we get to step 2. I'll say, do you believe in God? Yes. We're moving on. They didn't waste a lot of time with them back in the early days. Anyway, enough about that. We've been doing some workshops, and the emails I've gotten from people doing this, I literally get tears in my eyes, the results they're getting. Ricky Corona over here is doing it. Matter of fact, that's on this meeting now, but I'm gonna tell y'all a funny story here. If you're really, really into the history, you might have heard this, maybe not. It's about a guy named Pat Cooper. Probably never heard of him. But Bill Wilson had written the first 2 chapters of the book. He'd written Bill's story, and there is a solution. Ironically enough, how it works and into action were the last 2 chapters written in the book. So he had written these 2 chapters and put a little introductory cover sheet with it, and it was kind of a promotional piece. They were going to try to raise some money. Well, a woman out in California got a copy of it, and her son was in a psychiatric hospital out there. His name was Pat Cooper. Well, he was really intrigued by it. So once they had the big book done, they did the multi-lith copies before the book had gone to the press. Well, Ruth Hawk, which was AA's first secretary, she sent the rest of the chapters out there to the woman in California. She got them to her son, and her son writes in, "This is miraculous. My life has changed," and just on and on and on. So Bill and all of them, they were so elated that this is the very first guy. He recovered from alcoholism by reading the literature that was sent to him in the mail. He was going to be their very first one that this happened with. So they were so excited, they sent the guy money for a bus ticket to come to New York. He was going to be kind of sort of a celebrity amongst them. You know, hey, this guy here, he read the book and recovered from alcoholism by doing what it says. So anyway, they send the guy the money for the bus ticket, and he goes from California all the way to New York. And they go down there to the bus station. He's on the bus. They go to pick him up. He's drunker than hell. So that's just a little funny history. I thought it was hilarious, you know, but that's how we are. You know, if you sponsor guys, you run into that sort of stuff all the time. But you know, I can't say enough about Alcoholics Anonymous. I live and breathe Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have an AA life and a work life and a home life. My whole life is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I run with a bunch of guys that are crazy as hell, just like me. And we make road trips all the time, going to meetings together, going to conferences and stuff like that. And man, I wouldn't, there's nowhere I'd rather be. Well, I'd rather all of us be in one room together. I'm not the most excited person about speaking on Zoom. I've done it quite a few times. I don't mind doing it, but I'd much rather do it, you know, face to face. But anyway, God has blessed this alcoholic right here. You know, if one thing I can say, you know, on the bottom of page 15 in Bill's story, me and my family is an example of this. I have 4 grown kids, all doing well. And boy, let me tell you something. If you have young children, don't ever quit this deal, because you have no idea the profound positive influence Alcoholics Anonymous is going to have on your kids if you stay here and you do this. But Bill says on 15, he says, I've seen hundreds of people, hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. And I've seen the most impossible domestic situations righted. And, you know, we're examples of that, you know, and gosh, I used to not want to be home at all. I'd get home and be thinking, man, how can I get out of here and go somewhere else? And now I love being at home right here with my wife. And we went from the worst enemies to that's my best friend today, you know, my best supporter. So anyway, thank you again, Stephen. And thank you all for being so attentive. And I hope you stay sober from now on, and not only sober, I hope you're happy, joyous, and free. Thank you.